Hello and welcome back to Solomon's Cave. In this video I will introduce you to a lovely new preposition in Biblical Hebrew, and that is the semi-separable preposition min. I call it a semi-separable preposition because it can appear in two distinct forms. First, it can appear like an independent word spelled out like this and then connected with the next word with a makef. But sometimes the author decided that he didn't want to spell out the word entirely with a makef. So instead it was pasted directly to the next word, and it looks like this. Now, if, or I should say when, min is a separate word plus a makef, it is pretty simple to recognize. You read it, start with the base meaning of from, or crack open a dictionary if you need to check with other meanings and functions it can have, and move on with your life, or with the rest of the sentence. In that sense, it is actually the same as other makef prepositions, like al meaning on or concerning, el meaning to or toward, or ad meaning until. But when it is directly pasted to the word, the fun begins. The base rule is the following. The mem and the hirek stay and the nun disappears. Well, the nun kind of disappears. This is something you need to know about Hebrew. Sometimes things disappear, but often they reappear somewhere else entirely in a different form. And this is something else you need to know about Hebrew as well. The nun tends to disappear and reappear a lot. In fact, the nun is probably one of the weakest consonants of Hebrew because of how often it disappears and reappears. This will become especially important when we get to verbs and verb conjugations, so it is helpful to already train your mind when looking at a Hebrew word to think, could a nun have disappeared here, and if so, where could I find traces of it? So what happens to the nun in this case? The first thing that can happen, and that happens quite commonly, is that the nun changes into the next letter. Here, let's take these two words. Min kol. Min makef kol. From voice. Now take away the makef and you get min kol. The next thing that happens is the nun changes into a kof and we get mikkel. But what happens when you have two identical letters, one after the other? Right, they are written as one, and then you write a dagesh forte in that consonant. But what happens if there already is a dagesh in the first letter, like in the beth? Well, let's follow the same steps here. Min makef beth, min beth, mibeth, mibeth. And now, through the magic of the rules of the dagesh, this dagesh lene is now a dagesh forte. Can you see the difference? No, but if you know the rules for the dagesh, you should be able to deduce that this is a doubled beth. Alright, if you've learned your Hebrew well up until this point, you know what's coming. The gutturals. Gutturals cannot take a dagesh of any kind. So what happens to the doubling here? Is the nun completely disappearing here? Well, in most cases the dagesh goes on a little journey and it ends up right next to the hirek. And now we have a tzerei. Like here, mehar, from a mountain instead of mehar. Or here, meir, from a city instead of meir. This is kind of what we saw with the definite article, where the dagesh forte sometimes turns a patach into a kametz. Here it turns a hirek into a tzerei. Now there is one exception here, and that is the chet. Sometimes the chet happily follows the same rules and allows the hirek to turn into a tzerei, like for example, mecheref, from a sword. But at other times it just completely eats up the nun without leaving a trace. Mechutz, from outside. In any case, if you see a word that starts with a mem with a hirek or a tzerei underneath, pay attention. If it is a hirek, and the next letter is either a non-guttural with a dagesh, or the mem and the hirek are next to a chet, or if the me with a tere is next to a guttural, then you may very well be dealing with the preposition min. In the video I made about the bet, the kaf and the lamet, the inseparable prepositions, I showed how the definite article is inserted into a preposition, where the prepositional consonant replaces that hey, but leaves in place the vowel. Now, if the preposition min is attached to a word that starts with a definite article, there is no such lengthening. In fact, the ha plus a dagesh doesn't even disappear. So it is actually super easy. The definite article does not disappear or is not eaten up by the min, and the min turns into me, and we're done. See for example, min haaretz or me haaretz, both meaning from the earth. As for the meaning of min, I have already given you one definition, namely that the preposition means from, and that is a good place to start. It can mean from in a spatial sense, away from a location, or metaphorically spatial. It can also be in a temporal sense, from a certain time onward. And it can mean from in a material sense, that something is made from a certain material. So far so good. It gets a bit more tricky when it gets a bit more abstract and should be translated as, for example, because, indicating reason, some of, indicating that you are taking from a group or a substance, or it should be translated as by or by means of, indicating cause or means. But with a dictionary and some puzzling, I'm sure you can figure this one out. Even more tricky is when it is used in a comparison. For example, Ezekiel 28 verse 3. Chocham ata mi Daniel. Wise you from Daniel. That will be the word-for-word translation. But that should be translated as you are wiser than Daniel. Or Genesis 38 verse 26. Tzadika mimeni. Righteous from me. Or more righteous than me. So if from or something like it doesn't make sense, try to see if the author is trying to make a comparison between two or more things. And that was your introduction to the semi-separable preposition min. Next we'll be delving into nouns again and look at the absolute and construct states, spread out over 2 videos. First we'll look at their forms, and then we'll look at function or their meaning.